Dave Mustaine and the boys over at Megadeth are back with a brand new album, The Sick, The Dying, and The Dead.
Hi!
And so without wasting any time, let's take a look at what is inside Megadeth's 16th studio record, and then hopefully answer the question whether this record can be bracketed with the same grading as the band's legendary early material. Here you go. Very quick before we start, as always, please do not hesitate to comment on anything you hear or see in this video, and especially if you disagree with me, because the whole point of our channel and community is, of course, to start a conversation. But alright, let's do it. The opening track of the record, which also happens to be the title track for this album, opens with an enchanted intro which slowly yet steadily grows into a bombastic main riff. And here right away, I just wanted to point out that on this album, Dave Mustaine actually pushed on what he does absolutely best, and packed it full of the memorable and very catchy guitar riffs, including the one on the opening track, which will follow you in different variations throughout the song. Overall, The Sick, The Dying, and The Dead is possibly the most definitive track of this album as a whole, as it features all of the elements on which Dave Mustaine and the company have put the accent on this record, including a suspicious intro, followed by a bombastic and catchy riff, a memorable chorus and a speedy guitar solo, and then an acoustic break, which this album does have quite a few, often followed by a spoken word. Leading once again to the main riff and a burst of energy towards the end of the track. So yeah, in a nutshell, that was a quick overview of the entire album in just one sentence. In addition, the title track is of course the third and final episode in a video trilogy of the same name, the story for which has been written by Rafael Pensado and Leo Liberti, who also happens to be the director of all three videos, and for which Megadeth decided to go in reverse compared to the track listing of this record. As running a little bit ahead of myself, I wanted to point out that the first chapter of this trilogy, We'll Be Back, is actually going to be the closing track for this record. And while this video of course follows the trend of the first two episodes of the same trilogy, the question which most Megadeth fans most likely will raise is why does it actually say to be continued at the end of this clip? And how will Megadeth continue the story now that all three of the videos are already out? The follow-up track, Life in Hell, opens with a very simple yet very catchy guitar riff. And by the way, just to point out for those who are new to this channel, whenever I say a simple riff, I never actually mean it as a bad thing. Because in my personal opinion, writing a simple yet very catchy and memorable bit is always the best thing a musician can possibly do in a classic heavy metal song.
Spy versus spy, you never have fans you tonight. The truth of where you've been, you get caught, and then the blame game begins.
And after the band keeps you on your toes for most of the track, the energy level on Life in Hell pretty much drops to an absolute ground zero, with one more slow breakdown and a spoken word performed by Dave Mustaine. Which, here's the thing, I actually don't mind at all. Yet in my personal opinion, the positioning of Life in Hell on the track list on this record could be better, since we just had another acoustic breakdown on the opening track, and are just about to have one more on the follow-up, Night Stalkers.
Yo, when you hear 4 MH47 and Black Hawk helicopters coming in low.
Okay, so when I was doing a short review on Night Stalkers a couple of weeks ago, I was actually rather harsh on it. Again, not because I didn't really like the song, but because back then I actually thought that this song was a bit too repetitive for my own taste.
Undetected between the heavens, the stars and the seas.
Yet when hearing Night Stalkers placed among the other songs on the track list of The Sick, The Dying, and The Dead, I actually have to point out that it fits perfectly with the overall mood of this record, and when it's listened with the other tracks on this album does not really feel repetitive as I mentioned before. And my only question remains is why did the boys decide to include 3 songs with a slow breakdown, one after another, right in the beginning of this record?
Locked and loaded, game's over, bitches!
And since I already have done a long and extended review of this track, I'm actually not going to go into the details of Night Stalkers in this episode. Yet I just wanted to point out one more time an exquisite job done by the guitarist Kiko Loureiro. And not only on Night Stalkers, but actually throughout this record. As come on, we all of course knew that Kiko Loureiro is an amazing guitarist. But in my personal opinion, on The Sick, The Dying, and The Dead, he might have outdone himself. On Dogs of Chernobyl, Megadeth finally decides to give their fans a break, allowing listeners to catch their breath by dropping the BPM by around 20 points compared to the previous tracks.
It was springtime.
Overall, even though I cannot really call Dogs of Chernobyl one of the greatest songs on this record, it does feature one of the most interesting choruses on the Sick, the Dying and the Dead, in which Dave Mustaine's rusty vocals are joined by a very mesmerizing, intertwined lead guitar part, which in my opinion is definitely one of the highlights of the first half of this album.
I see your face wherever I turn. There's blood on my lips as my eyes start to burn.
Lyrically, of course, the song talks about the Chernobyl disaster, which happened more than 36 years ago, and which the Soviet officials were trying to hide from everyone around the world, and which of course happened just several kilometers from where I am recording this video.
Vanished and left me behind like one of the dogs of Chernobyl. Where did you go?
And so here I'd like to point out once again the war in Ukraine is still raging. And in fact, since the Russian invaders actually seized the biggest nuclear power plant station in Europe, there is still a risk of the similar disaster happening one more time. So please continue supporting Ukraine in any way you possibly can. And please don't forget to spread the word about it and never normalize in your head that the biggest war since the World War II is actually happening right now in the middle of Europe. And by the way, a piece of nerdery, a correct spelling of the town of Chernobyl is actually done with an O and not an E, as the one used in the title of this track was actually done in a Russian attempt to erase Ukrainian language and russify the names of the town during the Soviet occupation. If you are one of those people who gets easily enchanted by a slow-paced song, then the far gone-like intro to Sacrifice will definitely wake you up. Overall, I have to say that Sacrifice might be the closest we get to a filler on this album, yet still have to point out an exquisite rhythm section job performed by Dick Verburen and Steve DiGiorgio, who recorded the bass guitar for this record. The intro to Junkie actually made me think that my player messed up and accidentally played me some Def Leppard instead.
Junkie, what you live for?
You and me, babe. Hey, hey.
Yet the song itself, of course, is a classic Megadeth tune, which at parts, because of several guitar licks, actually gave out a certain Countdown to Extinction vibe to me.
Fire, junkie, what you live for?
And of course features a wonderful half a song long guitar solo by Kiko. And thus ends the first half of the album, both time-wise and music-wise. Because yes, in my personal opinion, even though this album does sound very modern-like, there's still a lot of old-school elements in it, including the whole idea of dividing the album into two different parts. Just like, you know, in the older days, people used to put some vinyl records and then listen to half of the album, come and flip the sides. Or if you're a metal nerd like myself, you still do that today. And yeah, maybe that's why I still think of the albums in that way. Nerd. But anyways, in my opinion, music-wise, there is a clear division between the first and the second halves of the album, which I will of course explain later on in the video, yet just running a little bit ahead of myself, I have to point out that I personally love the second one much more than the first one.
What?
And since we are having a little break here, I just wanted to point out that now would be a good time to write in the comment section what you personally thought about the Sick, the Dying and the Dead. And of course subscribe to the channel in case if you haven't done so yet. Do it. At first point, the interlude piece Psychopathy might sound like absolutely unnecessary one on this record. And it actually might be true, yet if you still do think of records in terms of two different sides, then this one definitely does open the gates to the new chapter on the Sick, the Dying and the Dead, leading to the slowest track by BPM on this record, Killing Time.
Some people look at you and feel sorry.
Killing Time at first was one of those tracks which I, to be honest with you, had to skip through on my second or third listen of the album. Yet after listening to it for a couple of times, I did discover that the acoustic part in Killing Time might actually be one of the most enchanting parts on the Sick, the Dying and the Dead, and overall this track has grown a lot on me after several listens. And in addition, I actually consider Killing Time now one of the most thoughtfully composed songs, which is able to keep the momentum going and building it up, opening the gates to a bombastic Soldier On. And speaking about Soldier On, of course, I have to point out that when this song was released as one of the singles to The Sixth, the Dying, and the Dead, I, after listening to it for several times, simply could not get it out of my head. As in my opinion, it does have one of the most catchy and memorable choruses Megadeth have ever written. Yet when the album came out and I was able to listen to the record from the very beginning until the very end, I actually realized that nothing has changed. As let's be honest here, after listening to all of the tracks on The Sick, the Dying, and the Dead, the chorus to Soldier On will still get stuck in your head for days to come.
Walk straight into the mouth of hell. I know I got to soldier on.
Celibatant, which follows after that, once again starts with a slow intro, a notion which is kind of not new on this record, yet this time it quickly gets interrupted by a powerful, vicious, and very old school guitar riff. On this track, co-written with Kiko Loureiro, by the way, just like most tracks on this record, Dave Mustaine actually goes back to the roots of thrash metal, combining the elements of new wave of British heavy metal and speed metal, and incorporating them into the song's composition.
You say your model, it's evident you've never met a meal you didn't love.
In addition, it features several tempo changes and a constant variation of guitar riffs, yet still remains very cohesive and not overdone at all. And here's the thing, maybe because of those old school elements, I actually weirdly consider this to be one of the strongest tracks on The Sick, the Dying, and the Dead. Mission to Mars might be the bravest track on this record and the one which clearly deviates from the overall sound and mood of The Sick, the Dying, and the Dead the most. Yet overall, Mission to Mars, with its almost hard rock-like feel, is actually one of the most memorable tracks on this record and definitely features one of the most melodic choruses Megadeth have produced in a very long time.
Blast off, I'm on my way, I'm a shooting star, a man on a mission.
Here's the thing, I actually think that if Megadeth will find a way to incorporate Mission to Mars organically into the setlist on their future concerts, I actually have no doubt that it will be a great sing-along for all Megadeth fans.
I hang with the man on the moon, I'll be there soon, a man on a mission to Mars.
And here we come to the closing track on The Sick, the Dying, and the Dead, the one which was released as the first single to the album, and the one which serves as the first chapter of the trilogy of videos released by Megadeth. We'll be back. And here's the thing, we might actually argue as much as we want to about which song on this record is the strongest one, or whether the title track is actually a perfect opener for The Sick, the Dying, and the Dead. I actually do not have any definitive answers for those questions. Yet one thing is absolutely clear, that out of all of the songs on The Sick, the Dying, and the Dead, We'll Be Back is in fact the perfect album outro.
Just when you think it's safe, I attack. We'll be back. When you least expect your fate, I attack.
This song actually features all of the strong points from this album, including a kick-ass riff, a very sturdy rhythm section, and of course a catchy and memorable chorus, which is already a great shout along on all the Megadeth live concerts. And in addition, and most importantly, it actually does its job right. And together with its lyrics actually makes you long for more music by Megadeth, making you excited about what this band, which has gone through so many band members and so much shit throughout the years, might put out in the future.
Let down your guard, full on frontal attack. I'll be back.
So let's conclude. Is The Sick, the Dying, and the Dead a good thrash metal album? Definitely yes. Is it the best thing that Megadeth have ever put out, and does it top a legendary album like Rust in Peace? No. But not really because it's a weak album, but because Rust in Peace was a freaking masterpiece. And once again, in my personal opinion, this album is in fact divided into two different parts. And while I do 100% understand that the riffage on the first half of the album is in fact significantly stronger, at some points at least, than on the second part, and the overall song composition and catchiness of those tunes is actually on a much higher level on the second part of this record. And of course it is this part which has much less destructive elements and gets its point across in a much simpler yet much more effective way. But once again, that does not mean that the first half sucks. It is actually that the second part is much closer to a die-hard, old-school heavy metal fan like myself. But what do you guys personally think about the Sick, the Dying, and the Dead? Please let us know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys, and we will prevail. Slava Ukraini!